Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special, well, not special, maybe unique episode of Yes Corner. Normally, I spend half an hour speaking to someone within the independence movement who's doing great things as building resources or bringing people together. But this week, it's just me and a few videos and hopefully some comments from you, our audience, as we talk about Food Sovereignty Week. It'd be great for me to have a couple of comments from you, just if you're there and watching. And what we're going to cover in the next, hopefully 25 minutes, half an hour, is just a little bit of background to why Independence Live have decided to run this campaign this week, which is Food Sovereignty Week or Sovereignty Week, Food Sovereignty Week. It really goes back to an interview that Kieran and myself did on Scotonomics with Fidel Kaboub. And we were interviewing him about monetary sovereignty. And that was all really interesting. And he also covered something called food sovereignty. And Kieran and I at the time were thinking, I don't think this is particularly relevant for Scotland because we're a pretty rich country. You know, we grow a lot of our own food. We export loads of it. Actually, we're probably okay. And then we took some time to look exactly what food sovereignty was. And we found that Scotland was actually in a very weak position. And over the last couple of months, we've been reading up, putting interviews in place, running our virtual event, which I'll talk a little bit later, and just raising the level of understanding, hopefully, but certainly awareness about the importance of food sovereignty in Scotland and the lack of resilience we have within our supply chain. And I'd love to hear from anyone who has experienced anything over the last few weeks that's maybe a little bit different from what's happened in the past. And what we have found is that Brexit, especially Brexit, but also the pandemic, has not caused the issues that we are seeing in our supply chains. It's just highlighted the issues that were already there. And Scotland is actually quite weak when we look at food sovereignty. So the first thing I wanted to do with people online now is to actually look at what food sovereignty is. So I think I've got a little definition here, which I'm going to put up. It's a description which I found online from a company, actually an organisation based in America. And here you go. So food sovereignty is the right of peoples to define their own food and agriculture to protect and regulate domestic agriculture production and trade. I'll let you read the rest of it there. And we just ended that with, ask yourself, can this be delivered to the people of Scotland without independence? And I'd love you to hear if that's what you actually think, that can we have true, proper food sovereignty without independence? So what we've been doing over the last couple of months is speaking to as many people as possible and trying to find out what it is that we can do to highlight the issues of food sovereignty in Scotland. And the first little video clip I wanted to show you was the clip from Fidel Kaboub when he was speaking specifically about food sovereignty. Now, as I said, we were pretty sure that this was all okay for Scotland, and listening to some of the stories that Fidel tells about the importance of food to especially the global south. Food sovereignty is important for us, but it's so much more important for the global south. So this is a really fascinating 4 or 5 minutes from Kabul, and I said it was one of the main reasons that we decided to cover this campaign on Food Sovereignty Week. So I hope you get a lot from this. Here's Fidel Kaboub.
So it's a very basic observation that you can't run an economy without food, without feeding people. And if a country relies on these imports, then it's always going to be deficient. The advantage that Scotland has is that it does have food security. There's resilience. I think that's the key thing for any, especially for smaller countries in general. Resilience includes food security, includes energy security, and it includes, from an economic standpoint, resilience to external shocks. And those external shocks hurt the most when it comes to food and energy, actually, and medical services, medical needs. I'll give you an example. Many developing countries, because they have these weaknesses in terms of food security, energy security, and high dependence on imported technology, especially medical technology and medicine in general, every time there is an external shock to their economy, typically what happens is that the value of that currency falls relative to the dollar, relative to the euro, the British pound, which means with the weaker currency, everything you import, whether it's food or medicine or fuel, is now imported at a higher relative price, which means you're literally importing inflation, which in most countries translates into social unrest, especially food. We have food riots all over the world when these things happen. So as a result, those governments, in order to avoid that social unrest, in order to avoid the economic pain for the most vulnerable people, those governments step in and artificially fix their exchange rate at a higher level. Now you have to prioritize industries and areas of the economy that exclusively generate dollars and euros. So tourism becomes an important thing. Export-oriented industries become incentivized and prioritized. And for countries that have energy deficiency and food, lack of food security, the more tourists you bring in, the more food you have to import. You can only bargain for more if you actually have a certain degree of resilience. So you can actually bargain. Otherwise, you have nothing on the table to bargain with. And that usually means at a minimum, your food and energy security. Because if your people are going to starve the next morning, you can't really bargain. If your economy is going to be shut down, no access to energy, you can't really bargain. So you're going to give them whatever they want, which means your entire economic policy is going to be steered from abroad. I'll give you another example from my own home country, Tunisia, related to agriculture. Because we're so obsessed with earning euros and dollars to pay for the external debt, we have an agricultural policy that actually weakens food security as opposed to increases it. So we allocate the most precious water resources in a country that experiences significant droughts, and we allocate the most fertile land to producing things like strawberries, which are not really needed for food security because it's an export commodity to Europe. And instead, we have lack of food security in basic staples like wheat and barley, which we have to import from the Ukraine and Russia and Australia and other places at prices that fluctuate constantly and fluctuate upwards in the opposite direction we want them, and cause even more food insecurity in the country. So had we had food security, energy security, had we had a stronger degree of monetary sovereignty, we would allocate our natural resources in the most effective way, which is produce for food security as opposed to produce for whatever Europe needs, in this case, strawberries.
Really fascinating stuff from Fidel there. And I think the key phrase that he said towards the end, which is we've got to be able to allocate our resources for the purposes that we decide. And that is where Scotland's lacking. And that's where any country who's not food sovereign lacks. Scotland isn't able to decide that we want to do X and Y with our land to the extent that we would hope, and we would if we were an independent nation. And a couple of things we're going to hopefully have time to get into is the impact of the Internal Markets Act, and also how Westminster up until now has been dealing with Scotland as a partner in any kind of trade negotiations. So we're going to cover those two things to give you an idea of what we're going to cover throughout the week, and also at our event on Saturday. But I've had a brilliant comment from Day. Thanks so much for joining us. Day's actually speaking at our Food Sovereignty conference on Saturday. And that was to my question, can Scotland really have food sovereignty without being independent? I would certainly agree. And again, across most of the conversations that we've been having over the last couple of months, this is what everyone else is saying as well. So please do let me know if you've got any questions around our campaign. It's going to last for the whole week. We've got shows tomorrow, Thursday, our brand new whiskey show starting on Thursday. And then we have our Scotonomics is covering food sovereignty in much more detail on Thursday. And we've got a really busy day on Thursday. We also have the TNT show, which is interviewing one of the leading voices in Scottish food production, Pete Ritchie. So lots happening. And then on Saturday, we have a virtual event which takes place from 12:30 until 3:30. Now, that is getting into all of the detail of the things that we're doing. What I'd love you and anyone who's watching is to really think about what you can do to help us highlight the importance of food security to Scotland, and also point people towards independence as being one of the best ways to secure food sovereignty. Now, what I'm going to do now is play another couple of videos. The first one is from Angus MacNeil, and I asked him about the Internal Markets Act. This is the piece of legislation that went through last year that took the power that was given back to the United Kingdom from Brussels and kept it in Westminster, even though areas that were given back to the United Kingdom were within, or should have been within, the control of the devolved nations. And this was all kind of packaged up in this wonderful sounding thing called the Internal Markets Act. So I asked Angus what he thought about it and what impact it would have on food security and sovereignty. You mentioned there individual acts and what we can do as an individual. I'm going to lead into the Internal Markets Act, and I wonder what your view is of that. What impact is that having in Scotland and likely to have over the next couple of years?
Well, I think, as we know, it's a power grab, and where we've got certain food standards in Scotland, these might be trumped by what they might want to foist upon us, and it's deeply concerning that this can happen and has happened. And, we make all sorts of noises that this will be terrible for Scotland and this mustn't happen in Scotland. A bit like we said, we wouldn't be taken out of the EU against our will. Well, we have been, and these things are happening to us. And again, it comes back to my earlier points in several answers here, is your response to all of this is independence. Ireland doesn't have the Internal Markets Act plaguing you, bothering it. There's nobody doing interviews in Ireland at the moment asking about the problems of the Internal Markets Act, because it simply doesn't apply. They don't have a government in a foreign nation or a neighbouring nation foisting things on them that they don't want, that their elected representatives don't want, that their electors and people don't want. And this is happening to us in Scotland on the Internal Markets Act, and on everything else. We almost accept that we're going to get stuff we don't like done to us, and it's sort of now part of the psyche. I mean, we're almost worried about waking up in a world where things aren't foisted on us, and every political decision that happens is the choice of the majority of Scotland. I mean, this is normal in normal countries. It's just not normal here, and we accept it. We accept it too readily, probably.
So that was part of a fascinating interview I did with Angus earlier this week, and it was really interesting to see that he found his way towards independence as being the answer for almost all of the things that we covered within food security, and especially around areas like the trade deal, and also the free trade deals that the Westminster government have been doing on our behalf, and also the Internal Markets Act. So I also had a conversation with Jim Fairley, a new MSP, who I'm sure some of you will know. And Jim was a former shepherd. So he's really, really deeply involved in the agricultural community in Scotland. So I asked him a few questions, and he had some fascinating answers. And it was interesting that some of his answers to the same question were actually very different from Angus. So you can see those differences and comment on them and take part in the debate, because we'll be showing both those extended interviews as part of the Food Sovereignty Week event on Saturday. But here's a little clip. So I asked Jim if the Internal Trade Committee had met yet. Now, this was a committee that the Westminster government were going to set up to allow Scotland to have an input into any trade deals. So I'll leave you with that hanging and wonder if you think this has been set up already. We have had one big trade deal and we've got others down the line. I asked this question to Jim, so let's see his response. It certainly sounds reasonable to want the devolved administrations involved before the trade deals take place. I believe we're also at the moment negotiating a trade deal with New Zealand, and there's talk of the American negotiations are continuing. So do you think this commission is likely to be set up before either of those deals are concluded?
Well, I have absolutely no idea whether they're going to have it set up, whether it's going to be taken, what input is going to have to any trade deals that are going forward. I simply don't trust Westminster in anything that they do in terms of what they're going to negotiate, because as far as I can see, the biggest focus that they have is getting the trade deals done at any price. And that to me is incredibly dangerous to the fragility of the industries that we're trying to protect here in Scotland. So the American trade deals, Canadian, Mercosur countries, the New Zealand trade deals, they're desperately trying to do all of these deals, and they keep pointing out, the opportunities that will come forward for Scottish producers when we sign up to these deals. All of these big countries want to sell us agri-produce. They all want to sell us food. They want to sell us their raw agricultural produce. So we are an agricultural producer. And what we are looking to do, especially for beef and lamb, is we want to be exporting it. We don't want to be importing it from someplace else. And there may be an argument to say, well, we currently have beef coming in from Ireland, but that's a system that's currently working. We can navigate our way around that. But when you've got a free trade agreement with unfettered access from all of these other big agri-producing countries in the Southern Hemisphere, then it's going to be incredibly difficult for farmers here in Scotland to be able to compete with that.
Jim went into a lot more detail around the impact of the free trade agreement with Australia on Scottish farmers and Scottish agriculture in general. It was fascinating to have his insight. Again, his extended interview, I think we managed to get about half an hour of amazing stuff from Jim. Will be a part of our Food Sovereignty Week event on Saturday. So anyone who's watching now and wants to drop a comment about their thoughts around food sovereignty, that'd be absolutely fantastic. One of the other things we really want to highlight in this couple of weeks, and we've been delighted with what's come out of this actually, we want to highlight the importance of food, Scottish food. And the best way to do that is to have some chefs cooking some food and explaining and going through some Scottish produce. So we're starting the event on Saturday with a brilliant 20-minute kind of cook along, 3 dishes that Wendy's doing for us. But I've just got a little clip so you can get a feel for that. Here's Wendy chopping some Scottish apples.
So I'm just taking out the cores here of all of these. It won't take me long. And just one cut with a knife and the whole job is done. Now, these can go into your food waste. We have a compost here, so all these bits and pieces go into the food waste. But actually, we also have rather a lot of bunnies in the garden, wild bunnies. And they're so cute, the baby bunnies. So we actually put out the apple cores for the bunnies in this house.
So that's Wendy Barry, who's doing a cook along at the start of our event. And we're also absolutely delighted to announce that Wendy's going to be doing a brand new monthly show on Independence Live. And we're looking for Wendy to be using just in season Scottish produce, because what this really is about Scottish produce, Scottish products, and understanding and using and playing a bigger role in how we transmit to the rest of Scotland that Scottish produce is something that they should consume and care about. Because if we do that, the more people who consume, the much more knowledge and much more education around food, then we're a really long way down to having much more sovereignty, well, as much as we can, without independence. So that's a summary of what we're looking to do. Now, as I said at the start, I'm sure you're thinking, well, how can you get involved? Well, the best thing for you to do at this stage is to share the content that we've got on Independence Live. So you'll see we've got a whole host of other shows throughout the week, including our brand new whiskey event on Thursday, and we have our virtual event on Saturday. So please do look out for the social media links, and I'm going to put some links in the description below for you to share. Now, second to that, what we would love you to do is have conversations with your yes groups, and contact Believe in Scotland and Voices for Scotland and Now Scotland, and say to them, hey, we believe that food sovereignty is so important. What are you doing to help raise the awareness? And we really feel that this is a fantastic topic for the Yes movement to get behind, because we know that a lot of people who have been or are traditional unionists and hopefully soft nose might be pushed towards independence when they realise that this is the best way to solve some of the problems that they have around land, job security, and possibly the impact of trade deals done by Westminster. So it's a really, really good way of opening up some people who might not be thinking about independence to the idea of independence. Now, that's a kind of bonus for us. What we really wanted to do as Independence Live was to highlight the importance of Scottish food. It doesn't matter if you vote yes or vote no. We really want to have more people consuming, talking about and educating others on the wonderful Scottish produce that we have. I've got a comment from a couple of comments. Thanks, Dave McGuinness, who says food security is very important, is imperative, and he's got a suggestion. Absolutely, that is not just the best way, but it's the absolute #1 way. Do that. Shop locally as much as you can. We actually cover some of the issues with that, because it's okay saying shop locally, but obviously there's issues around supply right now, but there's also an issue around price. And that's something that we think is going to have a much bigger impact as we move through the year. And again, this is really around the sovereignty. We are unable to really decide on the prices because we are such a small part of the supply chain. Our supermarkets are buying purely on profit, so we don't really care where the produce comes from and where that profit is going. They're not there to support the local economy, the local producers, and this is something that we have to really encourage. I'm a big fan of the Zero K movement, which is really popular here in Catalonia, which is buying and using produce from as close to where it's consumed as possible. And I'd love to see much more of that in Scotland. So I hope that's been useful, a very quick run through of what and why we are planning to run a Food Sovereignty Week. But please do share what we've got, start having conversations with your Yes group and with other people, and really think about how we can increase the knowledge, the awareness and the consumption of all the amazing food and drink that's produced in Scotland. So thanks very much for joining me. I hope you can take an active part in the Food Sovereignty Week campaign that Independence Live have launched this week. And until